Okay, everyone, thank you so much for attending. I will be starting because it's 2 o'clock and we've got quite a lot to go through at the minute. Um, we are trialing a new way of using Teams, so I'm hoping it's working. It means I can't see any of you and I can't hear any of you at the minute. And then at the end of the session, I'll be able to hear and see you as well. But if you do have any questions during the presentation, please pop a message in the chat function. And my colleague Laura should be there to kind of work through it as well and answer any questions as needed. Um, if there's any issues afterwards as well, this is being recorded. So that you'll be able to access the link anytime. I think we'll be submitting it onto YouTube on Monday, so you should be able to, we'll share the link after that. So you can rewind and look through, especially if you have any questions or if you've not had time or you have to leave early. It's completely fine. So we'll begin unless there's any issues. Laura, is that okay?
Yeah. Everything good. I'm not
Fab.
sure if chat is working. If somebody on the call could just test out, somebody put a message in the chat so we can see if it's working, please.
You keep saying I'm removing people from the chat, which I
Yeah.
don't know. Oh, yay. Okay.
Fab.
Yay.
Working. All good. Thank
I'm not
you,
very
everyone.
technical. Thank you. So just if anyone's not sure why they're here today, this is the Building Stronger Communities Together Grant Programme 2025 information session. Essentially, it's just to provide some technical information on how to apply for the grant. It's a bit of a slog. We've got quite a bit to go through, so we're being really strict and we're just allowing questions right at the end. So if you've got a pen and paper to hand, scribble down any questions as we go. Hopefully the slides should answer all your questions, but they probably won't. They probably won't answer all of them. So just before we start, virtual meeting housekeeping, please mute your microphones throughout the presentation. There will be time for questions at the end, and a recording is taking place. So when we do allow you to turn on your microphones and your cameras, if you don't want to be filmed, please keep your cameras off. That's completely fine. You are also very welcome to contact our team afterwards. I'll send there's some links in the next slide with some information on our contact details. And we're always happy to answer questions afterwards as well. So a quick purpose of the actual session. We're here to share information about the Building Stronger Communities Together grant. We're not here to tell you how to write your application, unfortunately. We don't have the capacity for that, and it's not fair to other people. Similarly, attending the actual session doesn't mean that you'll be successful. It's just a recommendation, especially if you've not applied to us before, just to get to know the processes that we use because they are quite complicated. As I previously mentioned, this is just for the technical side of the application. Our team are administrating this grant on behalf of the social cohesion team, so we can't answer any questions around whether your project is appropriate, or like any questions around social cohesion. We recommend you contact Samia Butt, which I've included just there. And we will be sharing the presentation slides afterwards, and we'll be sharing the recording afterwards as well. So if you have missed anything, don't worry. So just before we start, I'll include some useful links, which again, you'll be able to access once we share this. So all of the information that you can find about the grant should be on the Manchester Community Central page. If you just type into Google Manchester Community Central Building Stronger Communities Together grant, it's a mouthful, but it should come up. What really confuses people is we use a smart survey to actually submit the application. So you may have seen that we have a Word document to draft your answers on this page. That's just to help you kind of think of what you're going to put, and then you have to copy and paste your answers into Smart Survey. Unfortunately, it is a bit difficult, but it's the only way we've found that's kind of works when we're doing grant funding applications. So this is a link to the Smart Survey. We do recommend having a look at Smart Survey before you submit. Typically with some grants, we have people submitting like 10 minutes before, and it can take like 15 minutes to submit your application. So please try and do that beforehand. We really recommend just try and get the day before if you're really struggling with timescales. I've also included a link to the actual strategy, which informs the grant programme. And I've also included a link to Manchester Community Central's support for groups. So Manchester Community Central provide third sector support across Manchester. They have a lot of support around like capacity building and writing applications. So if you do have any questions around writing applications, I'd suggest you contact them. And then finally, just some key contacts. My name's Lucy. I'm part of the Our Manchester Funds team. We're administrating the grant on behalf of the Social Cohesion team. So this is our team contact email, and then underneath is Samia's contact email if you have any social cohesion specific questions. And as mentioned, there'll be a Q&A at the end. So if you are thinking, oh, I don't understand this, please wait until the end and we can answer your questions. So just quickly before writing your application, please read through the prospectus document, read through the application guidance form, and draft your answers in the application Word form. And if you sat there thinking, oh my goodness, I have no idea where this is, Laura's just sent a link into the chat. And if you scroll down right to the end, you should see downloads. And 3 things which says funding specification, guidance, smart survey Word version. They're links that should hopefully download onto your laptop. Essentially, the prospectus just has a summary of all the grant information. The application guidance form, we suggest that you use that alongside drafting your answers. It just includes more details. If you're reading a question and you're like, I don't know what that means, hopefully that should supplement it. And then the actual Word form is just to help you draft your answers. It's not the actual form that you submit. You then have to copy and paste your answers into Smart Survey. We're very sorry. It is a bit of a long process. So as mentioned, you should be able to access those. If you're struggling with accessing those, please contact the OM funds at manchester.gov.uk email address, and we can send you the physical copies of that. After that, if you do have any questions in the meantime, as mentioned, contact the team. We'd be happy to respond and answer any queries. When you've finally drafted everything and you're ready to submit, go on Smart Survey and submit. Following that, we will be screening your applications for eligibility. So we're just checking that what you've said is what you're actually doing. And then we will send your application to be scored by a separate assessment panel. So it's not my team that do the scorings, it's a separate assessment panel made up of experts within the field. Successful applicants and unsuccessful applicants will be notified and contacted. We'll contact successful applicants around taking payment methods, and we will be providing feedback to unsuccessful groups as well. Just to note that it might take some time for us. We're expecting to give the notification of whether you were successful or unsuccessful on the 14th of February. However, we expect feedback can take up until March time to undertake, just because we're a very small team and we're expecting quite a lot of applicants. Quick summary of the timescales. So the original deadline was the 9th of January. That has now been extended, thankfully, to the 16th of January 2025 at 4 p.m. Please submit before 4 p.m. We are not supposed to accept anything that comes after 4 p.m. As mentioned, the funding decisions will be communicated on the 14th of February, and we expect payments to be made to successful organisations on the 31st of March, and all activities to be completed by the 31st of July 2025, which is very, very strict timescales. We completely understand that it's strict timescales. Unfortunately, this has been administered by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And these are just the timescales that we've been provided with. We understand it is ridiculously short, but it was either stick with these timescales or not deliver the grant programme at all. So just on the timescales, just to make sure that the activities that you propose are achievable. We're not expecting you to be delivering a massive project in 4 months. Please be realistic with what you can actually deliver in that timescale. And then just a quick summary of the grant information. The minimum you can apply for is £10,000. So unfortunately, you can't apply for £9,000. And the maximum grant you can apply for is £30,000. We always say you don't have to apply for the maximum if you don't need it. And similarly, you won't be prioritised if you only apply for £10,000. That's not how we prioritise our applications. Organisations can only submit one application, but that's as the lead partner. So if you're in contact and partnerships with other groups and they're submitting a different application, you can be listed as a partner on other applications, but you can't submit like 5 project proposals from one organisation. And then specifically around eligibility, we're quite strict with the types of organisations that can apply to the grant, and people get a bit overwhelmed when they look at this list. Essentially focus on the last one if you're unsure. If you're any kind of community or charitable organisation, essentially you can apply. However, there are restrictions. So for example, schools, we're not accepting as lead applicants, and housing associations, for example. If you're really not sure, please just get in contact with the OM Funds team, and we'll be able to check for you as well. Because I think we did miss some kind of specific community interest company limited by a specific share. We've had a query from someone else, and just come and contact us, and we'll check. We'll make sure that you can apply. Please, if you submit an application, check that you have a valid organisation bank account. Not an individual bank account. We can't, unfortunately, send money to individuals due to kind of the council restrictions. It must be registered in your organisation's name. Please ensure that you have 3 or more trustees or directors that are not related to each other or and are not paid shareholders. If you're a really small community group, we do still expect you to be constituted, so you should have some kind of governing documentation, such as constitution, articles of association. It can literally just be like 2 pages explaining what your organisation is. But we still expect you to have 3 or more trustees or directors or senior staff that aren't related to each other. We require you to have a safeguarding policy in place that's relevant, including a named safeguarding lead, a health and safety policy, relevant insurance cover, depending on the type of activities that you'll deliver, and some form of proof of working with Manchester residents for the past 12 months. So if you don't have any of these, please don't apply. You're wasting your time. If you don't have a safeguarding policy at the moment, but think you can write it in 2 weeks, maybe apply, but we wouldn't recommend it. We're trying to ensure that the activities that are delivered will be kind of consistent and actually supporting people, and we want to make sure that it's led by experts. And social cohesion projects can be quite controversial or contentious, and we really need people, experienced staff, to be supporting the beneficiaries. When we say proof of working with Manchester residents for the past 12 months, this can be, when we do our due diligence checks, this can be like evidence on your social media or where your registered address is. You can be, for example, based in Salford, but if you have evidence of delivering inside Manchester resident area, that is still fine, and we can still accept that. And just to make it more complicated, when we say Manchester residents, unfortunately, we don't mean all of Manchester. That would be too easy. We unfortunately mean the Manchester City Council wards, which this beautiful map shows. And if you go on the MAC website, there is a link to this ward map. Essentially, unfortunately, means that we can't support any projects that will be supporting Stockport residents, Trafford residents, Salford residents, Oldham, etc. It's specifically just in these wards, and they have to be residents within these wards in order for you to receive funding. And when we evaluate it at the end of the project as well, we will expect you to kind of have some way of measuring this, so collecting postcode data from beneficiaries and things like that. So that is expected, and that's just due to the way that the funding is created within the council. We're only able to support people who live in Manchester City Council area, unfortunately. As previously mentioned, please submit on Smart Survey. You don't need to create a Smart Survey account. You should just put in your email address and it should save your application. If you scroll down to the bottom when you first submit and click Save and Continue Later, you can go away from the application and it should send you a link to your email address. But please check your spam and junk folder, because it always goes into spam and junk folder. And if you're definitely certain that you've not been sent a link from Smart Survey, then contact the team and we can send you a link. That's completely fine. Don't use your normal back button on your computer if you wanting to flick back and forwards to questions, as that it won't save your submission. So please use the previous button, which will be at the bottom of the page. You should also be able to print your response. And if you have any issues with Smart Survey, if there's anything you don't understand, please just email the team. We can also send you a copy of your application if you're unsure. As briefly mentioned, we are encouraging partnerships. However, that does not mean that they're a requirement. you will not be prioritised if you have 5 partnerships with your project. It's just based on the idea of social cohesion and improving kind of cohesion between different groups. And especially due to the short timescales, we're not expecting you to create a new partnership in this amount of time. It's not achievable, and it's not realistic, and it's not fair on your staff. So it's essentially just where there's existing partnerships in place, that's completely fine. However, if you are planning on submitting a partnership application, we would expect some form of documentation listing the roles of the different organisations. So we list a memorandum of understanding, but it can be similar as long as you've got something written down that explains who will be getting the money, who will be managing the money, what the different roles are of the organisations, and that's fine. And again, if you have any questions around partnerships, please do contact the team. That's completely fine. So very, very quickly, I will summarise the objectives and the principles of the grant. So these 3 objectives are based on the strategy itself, which was undertaken after about 12 months of consultation with the community. And they are the very high level, they're very strategic. And these are relationships, participation and belonging. So when we say there will be more explanation within the documentation for the grant, but when we say relationships, we mean getting to know one another, bridging differences between communities, people doing things to help each other and belonging to a community. When we say participation, we mean helping all communities to feel empowered to improve their neighbourhood and address any shared challenges together. And when we say, these are examples, when we say belonging, we mean make ourselves and the people around us a part of our local neighbourhood and the city, valuing diversity and difference and celebrating what we have in common. These are very broad, and these most proposals and projects that you deliver will likely relate to these. And again, if you have a look at the Building Stronger Communities Together strategy, it goes into a lot more detail around what these mean. Because these are relatively broad, we delve in a little bit more into the principles of the grant. And in your application, you will be asked to click at least 2, and you will be asked to evidence how your project will demonstrate delivery against these. I think the specific number is 3 principles that you'd have to match against. It doesn't matter. So if you click all 6, you won't be prioritised more than someone who's just clicked 3. It's more around how you answer the question and how you demonstrate that you're actually going to deliver against these. So for example, if you click number 1, which is 2 or more organisations working together to improve their relationships with each other and better support the local community. For example, if I was a charity and I was working with the local police to improve our relationships with each other and a specific community, for example, I can't think of an example. I would then in my application have to specify who I'd be working with, the police, who I was, my organisation, who your specific beneficiaries are, and go into detail around how your project will demonstrate this essentially. And it looks like there's a lot to go against, but essentially this is to help us understand that you're actually meeting the aims of the criteria, because social cohesion is a really broad topic and there's loads of activities that are included within social cohesion. It's not just restricted to like ethnic or religion. It can include like socioeconomic background, culture, age. It's just around difference in communities and building that together. And as previously mentioned, if you have any questions around whether your project relates to social cohesion, please contact Samia Butt. Her email address is within this PowerPoint and on the MAC page as well. Oh. And then just to help you a little bit, if you sat there thinking, oh my goodness, what could you possibly include in this? There's some examples of projects, but just a caveat is that these are not, you don't have to copy these. You don't have to specifically have one of these as your project. These are just ideas to help you understand the types of activities that this grant will fund. So a couple of examples: intercultural exchange programs, building awareness of different traditions and communities, or sporting activities bringing people from different backgrounds together. This is mainly just to summarize, because a lot of people get confused around what social cohesion actually means. So these are just some examples, and these are also included in the prospectus document and the guidance document and the application form as well. So specifically what we won't fund, because of the tight timescales and because of the kind of the activity delivery and the aims and objectives, Unfortunately, this is not for capital costs, so we cannot support like costs for renovations to a building and things like that. Recruitment costs we won't fund, again, due to the short time scale. We will fund staffing cost if it's related to the project. So, for example, if you have a project manager that will be managing the project for 4 months, you're welcome to include that in your costings. If it's just something completely random, like your cleaner that doesn't clean the projects, or it's just random cost recovery, we won't fund that, unfortunately. If you have any questions, contact the team. But there's a little Word doc, a Word box underneath the costings question, and that's just where you explain where you've got your costings from. So if you've included something around staffing cost, please just include in the Word document underneath. These are related to the specific projects. They're not just general staffing costs. Similarly, core costs, if they're not related to the specific project, we won't fund them. If they are related to the project, yes, they're completely fine. Please evidence that. We can't fund individuals, so we can't give direct payments to individuals for travel study. If, for example, you're wanting to pay people for their time to attend sessions, you need to speak with us beforehand. We can't justify giving kind of individual payments to people. Typically, we do like vouchers and things like that. That's just to do with like the fraudulent activity and restrictions we have as a council. Unfortunately, we can't fund activities that have already taken place before the timescales. So all activities must be, I think, from the 31st of March, we said, when you receive the funding. If you're unsure, again, let us know. We can only fund activities that you will be delivering. We can't fund things that have already happened. Any one-off purchases that aren't relevant to the activities, we can't fund. Food bank projects or projects where food provision is the main specific offer, we can't fund, and that's due to the Food Partnership, which deliver their own grant funding programme. We can support activities if there's an element of food that's not the main offer. And again, if you're unsure, please just contact us. Activities that promote political views specifically, we can't support, and that's similar with religious views. That being said, we will support religious organisations. We just can't support activities that promote the religious views of your organisation. We unfortunately can't provide funding for hourly wages or rates for volunteers, as that undermines our categorisation of what a volunteer is. Similarly, with like individual research projects, we can't support. Any purchases of vehicles, land, property, or essentially any work that isn't charitable or doesn't benefit Manchester City Council residents. And as I mentioned, direct payments to beneficiaries as well. It sounds really strict, but we're trying to be as clear as possible so that you're not wasting your time when you're writing out your costings, essentially, and you can understand what is and isn't applicable to the grant. What the actual assessment panel, who are separate to my team, will be looking for when they're scoring applications, they will be looking for the skills and experience of your organisation. This will be demonstrated throughout the questions and how you answer the questions. Essentially, what we mean by this is make sure to say what your organisation is skilled at and evidence that and show examples of that. So, for example, if you've delivered successful projects before, or if you've got kind of like quotes from beneficiaries and things like that, any kind of evidence to show that you've got experience of delivering similar projects or to similar communities, just to show the panel that you can actually deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Similarly, they want to make sure that your application actually responds to the grant. So I know quite a lot of the time you'll be already delivering a charitable project and you're having to find some kind of grant funding to support the project. Completely fine to try and squeeze it into the objectives and principles of the fund. But if you're really struggling and they're not meeting the objectives and the principles of the fund, the grant funding probably isn't right for this project. That being said, please just make sure that you include evidence to show that you actually do respond to the objectives and principles of the fund. So there are specific questions in the application form around objectives and principles. Please just make sure to use evidence that you're actually going to meet these. Similarly with the impact is possibly one of the most important things that you'll be scored on. Essentially, what we mean by this is what difference you will make to the people that you support. So why are you delivering this project? What's the actual importance of it? how are you going to support these people? What's it going to look like at the end of the project when it's finished? Like how are you going to support people? What's the end result? And then finally, value for money. Don't get scared when we say value for money. So we may calculate cost per head, but you won't be marked down necessarily if you have, for example, really, really high costs per head, but you're delivering really, really hands-on, in-depth activities with a really key group of people that otherwise just wouldn't be getting this kind of support, and they need like the highest amount of support. So we're supporting projects that are good value for money, but if you can justify any high costs, then we will take that into consideration. Essentially, when we're looking at costs, we want to check the costs against timescales, if they're realistic, if you have any like evidence, so you've delivered projects like this before, or you've researched the cost of things. And finally, just make sure to check that your costings add up, because you'll be in a rush to submit it. Just get someone else to check through your application and check that you meet these 4 criteria, and just make sure that the numbers add up, because we quite often get that, and sometimes we'll have to go back to the organisation and check. And just to say as well, your project will be evaluated at the end if you're successful. So please be realistic about what you can actually achieve. It's only a really short project timescale, 4 months. You're not going to be able to deliver everything. We will be measuring your original application against your project. So at the end of the project, if you say, oh well, we've not actually done everything that we said we're going to do, we do actually have the right to rescind payment. We don't like to do that. And if you think halfway through, oh gosh, we wanted to do this, but actually this seems more important and like it deliver a better impact, contact the team. That might be completely fine. We might not say, oh no, we'll give us the money back. Just make sure that you're being realistic when you're writing your application. That's all we ask. You don't have to kind of commit to a ridiculous amount of work that will stress you and your organisation and your staff out, if it's not realistic. And just on that, if you're using AI such as ChatGPT to help draft your answers, that's completely fine. Especially, I know groups where English is your second language, it's really useful to help structure, or if you have kind of neurodivergence, it's really useful. Please don't just copy and paste the questions into ChatGPT and copy and paste the answers, because it's not going to be specific. It's not going to have enough evidence. It's not going to support your organisation. Please use more evidence and tailor your answers and amend your answers. We get loads of applications that have really obviously used ChatGPT, but they've just not changed anything, and it's just really broad, and the answers don't actually answer the question at all. Like, don't forget, it is a computer. It's not always going to be accurate, and it's not always going to answer the questions properly. Yeah, just please don't use it to write your entire application. You can use it as a tool, but don't just copy and paste it. Couple of tips as well. And again, I'll try not to read through all of these because your eyes probably hurt and you're probably sick of hearing my voice. Please just make sure you answer the questions we ask in the form. If you don't understand the question and what it's answering, check the guidance form. And then if you still don't understand, contact the team. We can explain it to you. Be really specific in your answers. You don't need to write up to the maximum word count. You don't need to use loads of detailed descriptive words. You can use bullet points. Just answer the question directly. And we always say to get a colleague or a friend or a family member to read through your application and check that it makes sense to someone who doesn't know your organisation. If you're talking about previous work, but you deliver across Greater Manchester, for example, please try and just focus on what you've delivered in Manchester City Council ward areas. Please make sure to talk about your experience as an organisation, any evidence and data you may have. Make sure that the panel can actually understand what your answers mean. As long as they make sense and they're clear, that's the best thing you can do. So you're welcome to use bullet points. You're welcome to use headings to organise your answers. Make sure that they're as easy as possible for the people who are scoring to understand what you're trying to say. Make sure as well not to assume that people understand. If you're a really famous organisation in Manchester, for example, the people who are scoring your application might not know who you are. They might not understand all the work that you do. They'll only score what is in your application form. So don't just assume that people know what your organisation does. Make sure to include that in your application itself. Spelling and grammar is completely fine if you've got really bad grammar and spelling, as long as we can actually understand what you're saying. So again, we always say just get someone else to check over it if you have the time. It's really, really useful for us if you're using figures to use exact figures. So for example, we ask how many beneficiaries you might support. You're obviously not going to know the exact number, just estimate, but estimate it based on, like, if you've delivered previous projects before and you've supported 60 people, then say, oh, 60 people we think because we've delivered this before and this is how many. Again, if you think, oh, I'm going to put 200 beneficiaries because then that I'm working with loads more people, so I'm more likely to be scored higher. We don't do that. It's not about the number of beneficiaries necessarily. It's around the type of activity and the impacts that your project will have. And again, you'll be measured against that at the end of the project. So if you say 200 and you actually only work with 10 people, then we're going to wonder why you've not worked with 200 people. Please make sure that everything you put in the application is correct and accurate. So we will be undertaking due diligence checks. We will be researching what you've put in the application. We will be checking that you've got all your governance and everything. So please just make sure that what you put is accurate. Open Smart Survey before the deadline. Please just have a look through it. If you've never used it before, it can be a bit daunting, but once you open it and use it, it's quite simple to use. And as we say, yeah, just make sure that you've completed the form. If you realise you've submitted it and you're like, oh my gosh, I've skipped 5 pages, or the word count was really weird and I couldn't submit it properly, just contact the team. We'll be able to undo your submission and you'll be able to amend it as needed, as long as you do it before the deadline. So just keep to the deadline of 4 p.m. on Thursday, the 16th of January. Everything should be fine. Just to say as well that our team will be really, really busy. We're expecting to be really busy on the day. So we'll try to answer questions up to the 4 p.m. deadline, but we may not be able to answer them. So please try and get your questions in as early as possible, if that's possible. That's the end of the presentation. I'm going to try and figure out how to allow everyone to ask questions. And Laura, do you want to maybe go through some of the questions that have been asked in the chat, if that's okay?
Yeah, no problem. So I'll do the chat first and then I'll go
Yeah.
on to the Q&A. I've managed to answer a couple, but it might be helpful if we just run through them quickly. The one that I didn't know the answer to was, what is the total fund size? And that's been asked a couple of times just in relation to wondering how many applications might be successful.
Yeah, so for some reason we're not allowed to say how much the total grant prize is, but it's around 17 to 20 applicants will be able to be successful, depending on how much they submit. So for example, if everyone's submitting £10,000 applications, then we'll be able to allow more. I think if you're really, really desperate to know the total fund size, you can contact Samia Butt, but she'd just want to know why you'd want to find that information out. I'm not entirely sure why we're keeping it a secret, but we are.
No problem. I think that makes sense when you're saying that it's, yeah, like say 17 to 20 applications successful. Hopefully that's helpful. Someone's asked about the split of the wards which sort of fit into north, central and south. So I've said that we'll send that afterwards because I think that's helpful. Again, total fund size. Right, so there's a question from Adrian around, can you explain when core or operating costs are or are not related to the activity? Can we apply for the full cost recovery for the project? So the response that I gave was, core costs might be related to running the premises and or facilities, might be recovery of admin on and or management costs, maybe regular operating functions like finance. So activity costs are always specific to the actions the organisation will take to meet the brief and are additional to what the organisation would normally need to keep running. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, what we typically ask for organisations is to have an understanding of what their core and running costs are, and then when you kind of submitting your project proposal, you'll be able to understand how many hours you might be putting into the project, So for example, if you're going to deliver like 20 hours over 4 months, you can then work out how much that would cost against your core costs. So if, for example, it costs 100k to run your charity every year, and that includes all of your core costs, you'd then divide that by 20 hours and you'd work out how much your core costs would be. That's typically how we ask around project activity. So you can't just ask for 30k around like admin and like running of heat and electrics and things like that. The main point of this grant funding is around the actual project and the activities. So it's around any core costs relating to the project and activities. So like the project administrator, evaluation costs and things like that. But again, if you have any more questions, please let us know.
Great, thank you. Is there an aim to spread the funding across the whole city? So if one area award has a high number of applications, is it unlikely that they will all receive funding, even if they're all really good applications?
So that really depends on the type of applications that we get in. So we're expecting quite a lot of applications. For example, we could have like 120 applications in our previous grant funding. They're typically always quite spread out. There's a scoring criteria that we use, and that's based on the criteria that we mentioned around like how well it answers the questions and meets the objectives and criteria, value for money, things like that. All of the applications will be scored on those criteria first. So each application will get a total score, and then be listed based on the score. And then we'd be looking through, so we'd record like other aspects. So like the type, for example, like the type of project, where it's going to be delivered, who it's going to be working with. But these criteria are the main things that we score first. If, for example, when they've got the full list and we look at the distribution, they may want to look at representation across each of the wards, but we wouldn't typically get rid of an application just because there's too many in one ward. It often depends on the grant funding that we deliver, and it depends on how good the applications we get in, essentially. So it's a very vague answer. I'm really sorry, but it really depends on the applications that we get every time. So like I think wards, it'll be really, really low down on the scoring list. Like value for money and criteria and things like that, they'll be things that you'll be scored against first. If they're really, really, really struggling and there's just 100 really, really good applications, then wards might be considered, but it's really low on the list.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good answer to that. Will this recording be shared? Yeah, no problem. I think you've said, can housing associations be partner organisations?
Yes, so they can be partner organisations. They just can't be the main applicant, unfortunately.
Yeah, and another question around schools are not eligible. It's the same, isn't it, that they can't be the lead organisation, but can be in partnership with somebody delivering a project?
Yeah.
Yeah. Question, funding activity needs to be completed by the 31st of July. Can evaluation, reporting and admin take place in the weeks following this?
Yeah, so it does say on the MAC website that the evaluation would be expected a month later. So I think the 31st of August, you've got enough. So you've got a full month to support with the evaluation and admin after that.
Great. Yeah, somebody else answered the same question, so you've answered that. Does the grant support projects with children? I know it says young people. Does that mean 12 plus? Basically, is there an age range for the people who engage with your projects?
So there's no age range specifically for this grant programme. Typically with our Manchester funds, it's just adults only, but with this MHCLG grant, it's any age. Specifically, there's some social cohesion projects where it might be like working with young people and working with old people. I think the only thing to say is if it's really, really young people, you'd have to really justify how it meets the social cohesion aims. So for example, if it's like under sixes, you'd really have to exemplify how it links to social cohesion and how it would improve social cohesion. But there's no age restrictions on this grant programme.
Right. And the last one in the chat, can the work start before the 1st of April this year? Example, once we've heard after the 14th of Feb.
I mean, it's very unlikely that you'd be able to, but yes. So as soon as we announce that you can do the project, yes, you can start the project. But for example, you'd have to really consider when you'll be paid. because the council finance system is a bit terrible, and it can take weeks for a payment to come in. So if you have kind of the reserves and you've got the funding to start the project from the get-go, completely fine, please do. You can start kind of the project planning and everything. You're very welcome to, but just take into consideration the capacity of your staff and kind of any costings that might come. But yeah, that's completely fine.
Just a couple more have been added. In the application form, it says we can't spend more than 40% of funding applied for on-salaries costs. This seems quite low. Does this include workshop leaders external to the applying organisation? Does that question make sense to you?
I think it does. I think it's saying, yeah, it is very strict. So you're essentially only allowed to include 40% of your costings as salaried costings, so for staffing costs. That's mainly because the grant programme wants to support activities themselves, which I understand a lot of staff actually allow the activities to take place, but it's to do with, it's not our team that decide these. It's the social cohesion team that decide this. And it's mainly because they've delivered grant programs previously where quite a lot, the majority of the costings went to staffing, and it was very difficult to see what activities were actually being taken place, and that it wasn't demonstrated very, very well. Unfortunately, it is very low. We do have kind of sections at the end around match funding as well. So we may not, you might have, say, the project itself costs 50k to deliver, 20k of that might be staffing costs. You are very welcome to also look for match funding from other funding sources or use your own reserves, etc. But unfortunately, that's just a restriction that we have for salaried costs. And yeah, and by workshop leaders external to the applying organisation, from that, I'd assume that you mean if you're having like external project leads from a different organisation, for example, partnerships, that wouldn't necessarily include salary cost, it'd be project costing. But please, Helen, I can speak to you separately about that just to get a bit of clarity on that. Just because I'm not entirely sure what you mean.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Helen, does that answer your question? And we'll come back if it doesn't. 1 second.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what I think.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think some of us have the same question. So I think if we have like a freelance workshop leader who gets paid by the session, who's not employed on a salary-based contract, and those would be considered as activity cost. I think that's what we need to confirm. These are not included in the 40% salaries. That's how I interpreted the question. That's what Helen said. So so these are project costs. Cool.
Adrian, do you want to come in?
Just to reiterate, so absolutely crucial question, that, because otherwise we're looking to spend 60% on resources potentially, which is not, I don't think is where this is heading either. So I think we need a really quick answer to whether or not it's not particularly about the costs of named partners. It will be about people you might call tutors, workshop leaders that you'd have under sessional, not employed contracts for delivery of those activities. I'm sure that must be allowable, but we really need confirmation on that. Thank you.
Yeah, they'd be considered as project costs, project activity costings. I think by staffing we essentially mean kind of like core staffing costs or internal staffing costs. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll just move on to the Q&A stuff from the bottom.
And just to say apologies for anyone who can't unmute. I'm not entirely sure what's happened with this Teams, but some people can speak and some people can't.
It's just a wonderful world of Microsoft, isn't it? Do all the partnership organisations need to link with City of Manchester wards, or just the lead partner?
Just the lead partner, and even the lead partner doesn't necessarily have to be based in Manchester City Council wards. They just have to have experience and evidence of delivering to Manchester City Council residents in the past 12 months. So, for example, like I've said, your partner can be based in Salford, but if they deliver on the border to some wards that are included in Manchester City Council wards, then that is completely fine.
Okay, great. In the We Won't Fund, can you please elaborate of the point individual, including travel, study, or other purposes? I think that's what you read out.
Yeah.
Does that include cash or voucher that might be given to participants?
So that specific point, individuals including for travel, study, or other purposes, that's specifically around sometimes you can get individuals applying for grants for like research purposes and things like that. So we're saying specifically we can't support that, so that is separate. However, we're completely happy to fund vouchers. So for example, if participants can't afford travel and things like that, you are able to reimburse travel through vouchers and things like that. Volunteer expenses, you are allowed to provide volunteer travel expenses. However, we don't allow you giving direct monetary payment. So for example, if someone comes up in your project and says, I've just spent £5 on the bus, can you give me £5? We're not allowed to allow you to give direct monetary payments. We're allowed vouchers and things like that. And if you have your own petty cash system that doesn't use our grant program, you can include that, but you have to have the proper policies in place. Essentially, what we're trying to avoid is we've had projects before that have been funded where they've given like £100 to £200 cash to beneficiaries with kind of nothing to check that the individuals are actually going to spend it on the correct amount of like the actual charitable purposes. And we have to be really careful with how we spend our money. We're very restricted by like financial regulations. So it's just, sorry, it's not very clear, but so we can give direct payments. You can't give direct financial payments essentially. If you're unsure, then please do contact the team. And similarly, it sounds quite confusing, but hourly wage, we don't allow hourly wages for volunteers because they're then considered staff.
Okay, thanks. If the project funding is supplemented by another funding, can we use the other funding to cover the ineligible costs through this fund?
Yeah, so that's completely fine. So if there's any ineligible costs that aren't covered in ours, you are welcome to use match funding to cover those ineligible costs.
I think you'll probably want to come back to this question afterwards. What's the average reasonable cost per head for a regular impact project?
It's really difficult to say. It's different for every grant funding that we do. It depends on the project itself and the level of. So, for example, if you're just doing telephone conversations, really light touch telephone conversations, and your only support, your cost per head is like 50, 60, 70 pounds, we'd want to understand why the cost is so high if it's just like a 5-minute conversation with like 200 people. However, if it's, for example, really in-depth, you're working with 5 people, but it's over the entire 4 months and it's really in-depth, you're working with them every day, every single day, like you're supporting them to do loads of activities and things like that, then 60 or 70 pounds will be really reasonable because you're delivering a lot. Again, sorry, that's not a direct answer. There's no set kind of cost per head. It's just they'll work out the cost per head and then consider it against the activity and the amount of kind of support and impact, essentially. So when you're writing your application, really focus on the impact of the activities that you propose.
Okay, thank you. Will you fund to a lower amount if you like the project but think it can be delivered for less? So I presume that means if you submit an application with an amount, would you consider funding the project but for a lower amount?
We have discussed this with the panel, but unfortunately, I don't think we have the staff capacity to be able to do that. So we discussed it previously, as in if we had like 200 success applications that we really wanted to fund, we wouldn't be able to ask them to scale down the projects just because the amount of time it would take to ask each of the projects to amend. So unfortunately, we wouldn't. Normally with our projects, we sometimes would do that, but for this grant project, unfortunately, because of the tight timescales, we wouldn't be able to.
Is it okay to apply if your organisation going less than 12 months? So is there does the organisation need to be constituted for 12 months to apply?
Yes, so we do expect the organisation to be constituted for 12 months. That's just around the experience of the organisation and to be able to deliver kind of support to possibly vulnerable individuals.
Yeah. How do you print the form? So we have
So when-
it on. Sorry, you
No, go
answer.
on. No.
Just it's on the website to download and print out from the Mac website, the Word version. But once you've submitted your application through the Smart Survey, you do receive confirmation of that and a copy of it, and you'll be able to download and print it from there. We are considering an application which involves a school as a delivery partner. The school won't receive any funding as part of the project. Is this okay?
Yeah, so as a delivery partner, they are allowed to be allocated funding. It's just the lead organisation manages the funding and sends so for example, if a charity is a main partner, a school's a secondary partner, the charity should send the money to the school. The school wouldn't be managing the money, if that makes sense. But yeah, that'd be completely fine.
What if you want to cover all wards? Do you tick all boxes /
Yes.
wards? Yeah.
So you are able to tick all boxes if you're expecting to deliver all. However, you won't be scored higher if you tick more wards. And often we'd really want to know how you're delivering your activities across all the wards. So for example, if you're just saying, oh, it's open to everyone, but actually we'll be based in Moss Side, so the activities will be in Moss Side. Just it's better to click Moss Side because we would be expecting you. If you click all of the wards, we want to see how you're going to be delivering on all of the wards, essentially.
Yeah. And the last one in the Q&A, and then I'll go back to see what's in the chat. What if the partnership organisation had been going longer or was trading as a sole trader for many years? So I think this is related to if they've not been constituted for 12 months, could they link up and the partner organisation had been?
I'd have to take that question back and check with the grant lead and check what the restrictions are on that. But I'll make a note. And similarly, with all of these questions that we're going through as well, we will be creating an FAQ document. So if there's any questions that you feel haven't been properly answered, we will be going to Samia and to our managers to go through and properly answer these questions. And they will be published on the MAC website on Monday or Tuesday next week.
Someone's asked about the recording. Will that be sent out today or Monday now?
It'll be Monday.
Monday,
Yeah.
okay. Another question just landed. Can the partnership cost be a lump sum payment to cover for their fee or general cost, or does it have to be budgeted and itemised?
It would have to still be budgeted and itemised just so we understand where the funding is going. But if I'm understanding the question properly, you can just pay your partnership organisation a lump sum, but we'd need to see where that money would be spent on. You can't just say, oh, we're going to give £500 to our partnership organisation and not explain what the partnership organisation will do. Like we just need like one sentence explaining they will be delivering this kind of activity for these kind of people. It's just to help the assessment panel understand why you're in a partnership, what the benefit of the partnership is, where the money's going, what it will be spent on. But again, when we say explanations, these can be really brief. They can literally just be like a bullet point or a sentence.
Okay. Just to confirm, salary costs are to be included within the 40%, but freelancers or sessional staff can be included under project or activity costs from the 60%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to the chat. I think I can't mute. Can you ask what role an organisation's income plays in this funding?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
So we do have a question I think we have a question in the application form which asks the organisation's income. That will not affect your scoring. So we're not going to kind of manage the different sizes of organisations. That's nothing to do with the scoring at the end. It's more, for example, if there's a really small organisation that only has an expenditure of about £2,000 and they're asking for 30k. It's part of our due diligence process. We then go to the applicant and want to have a better understanding of how they'd manage the 30k if they've only ever managed very small pots of funding. So it doesn't play into the scoring, it's just around our due diligence checks to make sure that they can actually manage a larger amount of money than what they've previously used. And we typically use the Charities Commission to check this, but we also use other methods as well.
And I think this is a statement rather than a question. On payments to individuals, making Manchester fairer and other MCC strategies are promoting the payment of individuals involved in participation and co-design of activity, which would seem to be an important principle for the participation objective of this fund.
Yeah, so again, this is a separate thing run by a separate, I know it sounds so bad, but this is by national government funding, and we're really restricted by the MHCLG restrictions. So we'd love to have deliver this program over 12 months and actually follow all of the MCC processes, but unfortunately we're really restricted. When we say volunteer costs, we don't cover volunteer costs specifically, because if you pay a volunteer over a certain amount, it then affects the legal, they become a member of staff, and then you need to pay national insurance and things like that. So that's why we say we don't pay directly to volunteers. If, for example, you're doing co-design, and it's with specific, for example, you commissioning, there's a professor or someone in the local community who's really knowledgeable about subjects, and they'll be taking part in your projects, and you'll be paying them for their time. That's something that's quite different, because then they're they're part of the activity costs. If it's, for example, just you're just randomly giving out payments to people for taking part in the activities and they're beneficiaries, we don't often kind of include that. But again, if you have any questions around this specifically, and we can talk through a specific example, that would be completely fine. We can communicate that with the team. I'm just very conscious of time, so we have 4 minutes. But again, if we do have any questions or you'd like to speak to us separately, you're completely welcome to do that.
That's everything in the chat and the Q&A. So yeah, like you said, 3 minutes for anyone if you want to put your hand up if you've got any additional questions or comments.
I've just put the omfunds@manchester.gov.uk email in the group chat as well, and I'll also put Samia's. So previously mentioned, if anyone's just joined late, Samia is a social cohesion lead. So if you have any specific questions around your project and its links to social cohesion and the strategy itself, please contact Samia. But if you've got any just general questions, please contact the Owen Funds team. Is that everything? And again, as we said, if there's any that's missed, please do send us an email afterwards, and we will be looking through the chat to make sure.
Yeah, there's one more just appeared. What do you define as an organisation with political views? Would workshops on, example, raising awareness about environmental issues, clean air, nature, as conducive to good health, would that be viewed as political?
So no, when we say political, we mean political with a big P. So political parties and things like that, especially around environmental issues. I think that unless it's Extinction Rebellion, you're doing criminal activities and things that we would it would affect our the city. It would make the city council look bad if we fund that. That's essentially what we're doing. We're trying to stop any kind of dodgy activities from being funded by the council. So political, we mean any political parties, but again, a community group, for example, the local Conservative club, they could apply for it if they're a charitable organisation, but they can't apply for political activities, so campaigning leaflets and things like that. That's essentially what we mean. So environmental issues, where it's kind of supporting environmental issues, that's completely fine. If it's any kind of direct action, such as Extinction Rebellion, which can be quite contentious, then no. Okay, I think
with the minutes spare.
Oh, yay. But again, if you really feel like we've not answered any questions, please do contact us separately, and that's completely fine. We will be sharing the FAQ on Monday, and we will be sharing a recording. And in the meantime, please, if you have any questions, or we've flown through that, and it's been a lot of information. So if you think when you're working through things, you're unsure or you have any questions, please just contact